watching the David Kis podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the podcast. Tonight I'm absolutely completely excited to be joined with another fellow linguist who is also called Alex Alexander. It's a bit of a coincidence, but I'm all here for it. So tonight I'm joined with Alexander Arguelles. I hope I got your surname right. That's what many online sources said. So thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Okay, well, thank you for having me, David. I appreciate the invitation. Just because people do want to know, to hear it straight from my mouth, the way I say the way my family's always said, my last name's Arguelles. Arguelles. That's not the original Spanish spelling of it. It has a diaresis, two dots over the U, and it's more like Arguelles. But if you write those two dots in English, you can be mistaken for having two I's, and so I just go with that here. So I don't mind and I respond, but the way I say it to myself is Arguelles.
Okay, perfect. Well, I appreciate that. So, as a starting point, I'll be honest with you, Alexander. I was absolutely blown away when I came across your work and when I was doing research, and I just have your work open here. And the fact that I always love language diversification. It's one of the things that I'm really interested in. Primarily language diversification, and in regards to getting multiple of many things, citizenship diversification. But languages for me are crucial because you can't naturalize in a country without learning the language there, in many cases at least. So as a starting point, I'd like to ask, because you are the son of the poet Ivan Arguelles, so what interested you in languages to begin with?
I suppose it's just the fact that you can see my books behind me here. I've grown up in houses full of books. That's just the norm for me. In my father's household, there were always bookshelves full of books in different languages and the like. And we traveled a lot when I was a child too. We went abroad, and he was able to communicate with people while we were traveling. And I just sort of grew up watching him sit and read and study languages. And to me, it just seemed like a perfectly normal, natural thing to do that I would like to do someday. And the value of knowing languages was also just apparent to me too, just from that upbringing. So, but there were other issues that he didn't actually encourage me when I was an adolescent. I had to go away to college, and when I got to college, I started studying languages, and then we could share them a lot after that. So we had a lot in common to talk about after I started studying them too. As soon as I got to a place where I could sort of study them in classes, I just started doing it. It's like, wow, I like this, and I'm good at it, so just kept doing it.
Okay, perfect. Well, I think that's the beauty with everyone's, when they can find something that they are, I guess, trying to achieve mastery at. When they find that thing, it's a beautiful feeling. It really is. I genuinely, I think it is one of the best feelings in the world when you realize what it is that you're good at, and you go, okay, I'm going to do my very best to master it and learn as much as I can about it. Now, obviously, actually, that's another thing we have in common, Alexander. I too grew up in multiple countries. I spent some time in the United States. I spent some time, obviously, based upon my accent, you could probably tell, England, other countries in Europe as well. Which is where actually I got my language diversification from. Not as diversified as you, but trying to learn a couple more. So I'm getting up there a little bit. So what do you think the educational system was like when you were going to high school, college at the time? Did they have a strong foundation for teaching languages, or was it something that you really had to do in your own spare time because the schools weren't doing it well enough?
I can say, I can only speak from my own experience, and my experience was studying French in school. And on the one hand, I got something out of it. I did. I learned it. Okay, you hear a lot of people saying, I studied the language for 4 years and I got nothing out of it, and I did well, and I can never speak it, never got it. I mean, that's not true. I did get something out of it. But that said, I later realized when I started studying languages more seriously in college and started teaching them to myself that the time and effort that I had spent getting there was just inordinate. There was no need to have spent it. With the amount of time and effort that I had spent studying it, I should have been much, much, much better than I was. So I guess, I can answer it in that personal experience. I had the opportunity to study one language through school, and I got something out of it, but it took a lot of time and effort that it didn't need to take to get to where I was with it when I started studying it more seriously in college and university.
Actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because that is one thing that I read about you across multiple sources. I have just one of them on the tab open here. is that you have emphasized a couple of times that your strategy was learning multiple languages, so not necessarily focusing on one for shorter periods, so such as 15, 20 minutes. Another website said half an hour. So again it goes back to diversification. So is that what you mean when you realize that, okay, maybe the way you learnt in high school, you spent too much time where you could have been a little bit more efficient in your studies and maybe perhaps gone even further in a quicker time?
Absolutely, yes. The experience that I had, I know this is out there too, but I was repeating this sort of fact where I studied like a total of 7 years of French. And then when I got to university, I took a placement test and I placed into second year French. And it's like, oh, 7 years of sort of inefficient study is the equivalent of about 1 year of efficient study, because I also started studying German. And I felt like at the end of my first year of studying German in university, where it was taught, well, my German and my French were kind of, pretty close. And so I'd done a lot more in German than I did on that. But then at the same time, I also felt that the experience of studying that language in the classroom was not very efficient even then. Even the German, the class was too large. A lot of the other kids weren't that interested in it. The teacher's time was divided. It's just a lot of stuff. If it had been a smaller, more intense class, it would have been a lot better. So I thought at that time to try to teach myself a language and see how that went. And so I taught myself Spanish. That's sort of my one of my first years in university, and that was even much better and more efficient than teaching myself than taking German in class. And so I kind of hit upon the idea that it's more efficient. Yeah, you don't need to spend that much time and effort if you're working in an intelligent, focused fashion. And you can do intelligent, focused fashion work better in short bursts of time. So yeah, I started kind of working to that. I mean, teaching myself Spanish, I spent, I don't know, half an hour, 45 minutes every morning doing it. And I didn't have homework after that. I didn't have a class to go to. And so, the how swiftly I got through the entire sort of book that I was working with compared to getting through my first year German book was just infinitely more efficient. So, if you want to learn lots of languages, you need to learn to study in a way that's most efficient for you to get that diversification. So, I think figuring out if you can study in short bursts of time, I think that's, and you can do that on a regular systematic basis. I think that's the most important thing to learning how to study efficiently for me. I know that there are people who work better or believe they work better in longer chunks of time. Maybe they really do, but I think people are curious. It's interesting to experiment with studying in small, frequent bursts rather than big, long, concentrated bursts, and see how that experience goes.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, one thing that I love about hearing your experiences is that, I have conversations with friends of mine or just people who I know, people who I meet, perhaps on the internet or in real life. And, we always end up talking about languages, which is always great. And one thing that you see is that a lot of people have this sort of idea that learning a foreign language, even as they grow older, which I had a conversation with Hungarian with Sissy about, she completely disagrees with this theory, and frankly so do I, so I'll be curious to get your perspective on it. A lot of people who are, let's say, past the age of puberty, maybe they're going into adulthood now, they believe that it's too late for them, that they grew up only speaking one language and that's all they'll ever know, because they'll never truly be able to master a language had they have learned it earlier. Now, I agree it would have probably been better if they learned a language in their childhood, but I feel like, you talking about your strategy of learning in shorter chunks, it does sort of open up the gates a little bit to people who might be a little bit scared to learn a second language, thinking, is this going to take too much time? Am I going to have to put in a lot of energy for this? And if you want to, great. But based upon your anecdotes, it seems like you kind of have a easy, very not at all gate-kept strategy to learning languages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I do think, if you have the passion and the systematic discipline to do something on a regular daily basis, I think that, yes, it is possible to get started in language learning in small chunks, and know that when you want to get more advanced, you're going to have to make those chunks larger, but it's also a lot more fun because you're using the language, and it's not just, going through sort of a learning stage, but you're actually engaging with the language, reading it or listening to it or speaking it or something like that. So Yeah, it's language learning does take a lot of time. It takes a lot of time, a long time, a lot of energy, but it doesn't have to be the wasted energy. And you can start in small chunks, and then when it requires more energy, again, it'll be sort of a different level, a different plateau, and so it's a different kind of energy.
Oh no, yeah, totally. And I think again that goes back to the fact that you are making it with your anecdotes. I mean, just having we're 10 minutes in, just having this brief conversation with you, you really do have such a open way of talking about languages, whereas a lot of people I've personally seen as well, they say, oh, it's really hard, you can only do it if you're really about it, where I understand that perspective, but also just to make it open to everyone and to give everyone the chance to try, I also think is really important. And with that, when I was reading up on you, seeing that you've done a lot of specialized work in Korean, that's how I was introduced to your work actually on the Korean, because I have a friend in Florida who is trying to learn Korean currently. He still messages me every now and then that he has trouble mastering the alphabet, but he's getting there. I think he plans to go to Seoul in a couple of years actually. So what would you say, out of all the languages that you know or have a mastery level in, other than English, is the one where you feel the most confident in speaking?
Well, let me go back to. I was thinking of something else when you said. I mean, I do think that there are a lot of people. I mean, I think that it's erroneous to just assume because I am post-pubescent, I cannot learn a language. I do think there are a lot of there are some grounds of truth for some people that might be the case, particularly if you haven't learned a language, not just post-pubescent, but for years, and you haven't learned anything and you haven't studied, you're just not in that mode, and you don't really have a passion for it. People like that might have a hard time, whereas if they had been exposed to language learning when they were younger, then they might have a foot up. But I think there are a lot of people who maybe had no experience studying languages ever, and are highly intelligent, highly talented, and if they have the same kind of systematic discipline or the character or some, if they're masters in some other field, you can transfer what you know. You can transfer mastery or an attitude towards studying and learning. You can transfer that from other fields. So I think there's two things to be said there. Yeah, there are people. If you haven't studied language, maybe you're going to have a charge, have time, but it doesn't mean because you've never done it, it's necessary. Again, give it a try and see how it works with this kind of method. Then you asked me which language I felt most comfortable in. Did you mean exotic languages, or just any foreign language?
Any foreign language at all. Yeah.
Korean. So I would divide languages into. I don't really think in terms of individual languages so much anymore, in terms of language families. So I'm a native English speaker, and English is it's a Germanic language that has more Romance vocabulary. And I've spent my life studying these two language families. I've spent my life studying the historical development of these languages. And so I don't just know German, I know Old High German, I know Middle High German, I know different stages of German. I know the relationship between these languages to each other. And so there are ones in this family, like German, where I lived in Germany for a couple of years, and I'd studied German all through college, and I double majored in German literature, and I love German, and I love German literature. And when I lived in Germany, I turned my, a second I got on the airplane there, I said, I'm kicking English out of my brain. I'm making German my operating system. I'm only going to use German. And so I just totally lived and breathed and functioned in German for the time that I was there. And then I kept doing that on my own for a couple of years after that. When I left, it just became a habit. So there, a language like German in the Germanic language for me, that's my core language. But because I know German well, and because I did dissertation work on Old Norse, and I'm a native English speaker, and I've got this perspective. There are other languages in the family that I can kind of like understand, and really, be able to read them and sort of pick them up if I have the opportunity, even though I haven't really studied them. So I can say that there are languages there, definitely. I mean, maybe I've never studied Faroese. But if I were to be dropped in the Faroe Islands, I think I could be functional and conversant in Faroese in a very, very short time, a matter of weeks, definitely. Whereas if you asked about Korean, where I lived in Korea for 10 years and I'm married to a Korean woman, I've written books on Korean, and my Korean is particularly when it was there, it was at quite a high level. I could converse about things that were interesting and important to me, the kind of discussions I like to have, intellectual discussions about culture and things like that. But my Korean, in a way, would never be at the level of my Faroese. Even though I can't speak Faroese at all right now, it's a Germanic language, and I know that sort of the Germanic language family. So it's kind of a complicated answer, but yeah, within each family, I mean, I lived in German for the longest time. German is quite familiar to me. I think if I had the opportunity to go live in Germany right now, I could just do it without a hitch. Likewise with French or Spanish are the ones that I have the most exposure to in the Romance family. But there too, I just the connection between the languages is important. You have a lot to transfer, and the historicity. So within the Romance language family, I've been trying to. I studied Latin first in university, and I learned how to read Latin the same way that you're taught to read Latin. And it was sort of a fast, intensive course. And then afterwards, it's parsing and analyzing and doing everything with the dictionary and translating and very slow, careful reading. But that's not all what it's like to learn how to read German or French. And I was always kind of frustrated with that. I was able to use Latin to do research and do things like this, but I wanted to take Latin and be able to think in it and be able to speak it. And it's a dead language, and people don't do that. But if you set your heart on doing something like that, I could finally do that. And a couple of years ago, I did that. And one way I did that was even sort of consciously in my mind here, sort of trying to make Latin my operating system. So these past couple of years, I've actually been thinking in Latin more. It's a complicated answer, okay? Yes, the Germanic and Romance language families as a whole, I would say I'm comfortable with particularly the ones that I've studied, the main ones: French, German, Latin, Spanish are the ones. And then, yes, because I lived in Korea for so long and worked on that, as an exotic language, I was capable of good conversations in Korean, some in Arabic too.
Oh, awesome! Also, I was unfamiliar. I was unaware of the Arabic, but I'm glad that you brought up the Latin aspects of it. Because I'll be honest with you. So my background is Hungarian and English. Both kind of grew up speaking both of them, so they're both on par for me. The only issue I had obviously is because I grew up in pretty much every country I lived in was English speaking. So for me, the Hungarian speaking was fine, but it was the spelling and writing that was taken down a peg or two. But I just spent a month in Hungary, and I found a very weird strategy, but it worked very well to be able to get back on track to reading and writing, and because English doesn't really have accents, but Hungarian naturally does, as well as many other European languages do. But I'm glad that you brought up Latin, because 2 years ago, because in the high school that I went to in America, they taught Latin, and I wanted to learn it, but then COVID happened and I left, so that was a bit of a mess. But then I found that Duolingo had a Latin course, so I did that, and I finished it. Now, I haven't looked at Latin for a long time, so it's probably all gone. I think the only thing I can remember saying is salve quomodote habes, and I can maybe barter for a couple of things or haggle in a street market. Although I don't know how useful that would be, frankly, trying to haggle in Latin. But I'm glad that you brought up Latin. So it is a dead language, yes, but if you were to speak it, Alexander, wouldn't that make it? Wouldn't that bring it back to life if one person speaks it?
I would certainly not be the only one. There's a pretty strong community of Latinitas, people who are trying to promote and engage in spoken Latin. I haven't had much direct contact with them, but I really, I'm glad they're there. I'm pleased at their work, and I know some students who have gone to various places for intensive sort of immersion stays and weeks with them, and always have very positive, good things to say. So there are people. There is a small community of people out there that one could find and join to speak with if that's really important to you to speak with. But the way I finally got to do it was speaking with myself in my head. That's the only way. I didn't know anybody actively do that, so that's the way I had to do it. And my academy now, I've got a course where we speak Latin. So there are places that you could do it.
Yeah, that's awesome because Latin is one where obviously, there's been things around the internet the last year or two where it's been like everyone thinks about the Roman Empire, which I guess is kind of true. I like to read about it every now and then, a little bit more than the Hellenic Empire, but the Roman Empire is genuinely up there for me. But just because you talked about the differences between old German and middle German and modern German. So when we talk about Latin, how similar is the Latin that people speak today to the Latin that they spoke back in Roman Empire times? Because the way I think about it is that obviously England was in the Roman Empire. It was in there. So the city of York was called Eboracum, which then answers the question why they call New York Novum Eboracum or Novi Eboraki, depending on the structure of the sentence. So, but New York as a city didn't exist in the Roman Empire time. So, how similar is the Latin of today to the Latin of the ancient times?
Well, that's a complicated question. There are those who make every effort to, to try to think, okay, this is the best reconstructed restoration we have of the way Cicero spoke, so we're going to try to speak that way. So there are people that make that conscious, active endeavor. Then there are people who uh, go more for saying, well, the place where it's really been used and is used still is inside the Catholic Church, and so there's an ecclesiastical pronunciation and ecclesiastical use of it, and so people study it for those two things. And so between the two of those, what's called the restored pronunciation is more like the Romans spoke. But the thing about Latin is that it is it's an extremely phonetic language. Doesn't have many exceptions to its pronunciation and spelling, and it's got regularities much more than a lot of the daughter languages the Germanic languages have. And it wasn't just spoken in Roman times. It was spoken, I think that, if you look, it was spoken well into the 15th, 16th centuries. There were, a lot of people, you have people even into the 19th century writing dissertations in it and, giving lectures and stuff like that. So it was spoken as a language of learning for centuries. And so, in a sense, why would I necessarily want to speak more like Cicero than I would want to speak like Erasmus, say? Erasmus was a Renaissance figure who, did it like this. So, ultimately, I think that we can't know how they really sounded, and if we want to speak and communicate, it's the important thing is to speak clearly and enunciate clearly and make it sound like a noble language, because it is. If you speak loudly and clearly, and then I think that that's the important. But you can follow the the standard rules of pronunciation, which are written by Quintilian about 200 A.D. So we have that as a basis, as the thing.
Yeah, awesome. Because actually, I'm glad that you said that it's the basis. Because for me, Latin, obviously, I didn't grow up speaking any Latin or Romance language. So you could argue that maybe the English helped, but still, it's more Germanic, I believe, than Latin. Then, maybe a language like Spanish or Italian would be closer to Latin than English would be. So for me, Latin was a very helpful foundational course to do for me to be able to branch out into doing mainly honestly Portuguese, frankly, but to do Portuguese, to do Italian, to I haven't done this one per se, I don't speak this language, but to do a language like Romanian or any other Romance based language, for me Latin is like, it was such a helpful foundation, because I felt like had I've just done the Portuguese, I probably would have been fine. But because I understood, the genders of Latin Romance-based languages, because Hungarian doesn't have genders really, so that to me was very helpful. English does a little bit, but not in the same way for me. So for me, Latin really did help me understand the foundations of all Romance-based languages.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I do think that if, as you said, if you started with Portuguese, knowing one Romance language helps you learn other Romance languages. But if there's a link between them, if there's, they're all the ones that you can study now are all sisters. The ones that you can study now that you can speak now, like you just mentioned, Portuguese and Romanian and French and Italian and Spanish, they're all sisters. So you can learn to know, say, a sister by knowing one sister. But if you know the mother, you're gonna be able to see what the daughter's going to be like. And so I think that it's just as a strategy, yes, I think that's why Latin was taught and emphasized for so long, because yes, it does give you a good, clear idea of grammatical structure, and it's the link between all of them. So I think if anybody's thinking, oh my goodness, I should have started with Latin and I started with French, well, it doesn't really matter. But yes, get Latin in there as the sort of tie between them, and I think a lot of them will, the relationship between them becomes a lot clearer.
Now, I'm glad that you mentioned about how, Latin is sort of the mother language of the Romance-based languages. Which language would you say is the mother language of the Nordic languages, especially? Because I've read a lot online, and I studied Icelandic for about 6 months, but that was like 3 years ago. So I think, again, I can only really negotiate prices and say, the introductory things, maybe say goodbye to someone, maybe tell them where I'm from and who I am, but I couldn't do this podcast in Icelandic, for example. But they say that Icelandic, and you mentioned Faroese, are very similar to Old Norse, far more similar than maybe Danish, Norwegian, Swedish, and, well, certainly Finnish, because it's a completely different language. So which would you say is the mother language for the Germanic Norse languages that we still have today?
Yeah, you just mentioned it. You gave a good overview of it. I mean, Old Norse, which is like Old Norwegian, is the language that became Icelandic. That's the literary language. There's the most stuff written in it in the Middle Ages, and so that is the sort of the link between Icelandic and Faroese, which you meant, and Norwegian. Those are sort of West North Germanic languages, whereas Swedish and Danish are sort of East Scandinavia languages, and they have there's Old East Norse that you don't have so much attestation for, but that was just a variant of Old Norse. So for all intents and purposes, you would say Old Norse is the direct. Icelandic is very little change from Old Norse. Faroese has diverged more. Norwegian is different, but you can see the relationship very, very, very clearly. And same with Swedish and Danish.
Yeah, totally, because that was what I always thought is like, an Icelandic speaking person, someone who speaks Icelandic, whether they're from Iceland or not, a lot of people say that it would also help them be able to speak Faroese, because apparently those two languages are quite similar. Now, geographically, for me, that makes sense. Also, historically, that's fine. That makes sense too. But one thing that I find quite sad about it is obviously this goes into account that Iceland it's an isolated island in pretty much the middle of nowhere in the Atlantic Ocean. They're sort of in between two continents, but they're kind of isolated as well at the same time. Very small population. I believe only 300,000-ish people live in Iceland, and with that comes the sad thing that not a lot of people speak it around, certainly not around the world. Maybe the diaspora, yes, but other than that, no. So I had this conversation with Alex Rawlings a few months ago. What can be done to ensure that a language that is endangered in the modern day, what can be done to ensure that language doesn't become extinct or doesn't die out in the next 100, 200 years? Because I still think Icelandic has some time, right? It's not something that no one's going to speak tomorrow, but it's something that I believe is at risk.
I'm not sure. I appreciate your question, but I'm not sure that I would feel that Icelandic is necessarily at risk. You can maybe relax a little bit about that. I think Icelandic is okay. It's been where it is for a long time. It's got the strongest sort of publication history. I mean, Icelanders know Icelandic. They're not going to forget it. They publish more books in Icelandic per capita, I think, than anywhere else, and they're just it's a very, very literate society. And because it has those ties back to Old Norse, there's going to be people all around the world who are always going to be not vast numbers of people, but people will be studying and interested in Old Norse, and so that's the sort of place to go and hear that. But there are a lot of languages that definitely are endangered and are dying out and that kind of thing. So gosh, there's so many things one could put at the tip of the tongue, but I think that one thing is, by having conversations like this, just encourage people to consider doing that, because of the fascination of learning a totally different language, a language that is it's not like something you've learned, and is something new, and something that if you know it, you're kind of helping to preserve it. And so sort of getting people to have that sort of mindset about languages, and just thinking, well, I need to, I want to spend my time learning something practical that I can use. If you can also think, well, isn't it practical to save something from extinction? So if people who were interested in it's an ugly word I kind of coined, but polyglottery as such. If people are interested in learning lots of languages, have that on your horizon. Just keep that open. That gosh, if I aspire to be a polyglot, maybe I should learn one language that is rare, that nobody knows. And if all polyglots did that, they would sort of be sort of stimulated in the study of it. And I think that in order to stimulate that, there are various ways now to at least makes what I would call a language museum, a place where people could go and listen to, and so you could have some sort of recording of materials that would be working with the language, stimulating the language, making some people interested in the language, giving the people who spoke it, I think, a bit more pride. I think one reason language is dying out is people don't value their own languages, and so if people got inspired with that kind of pride to want to at least leave a record for their language, then it's something that could be preserved, resurrected, brought back, and hopefully not need that, because people would be studying more. But it is a dire situation out there, given the sort of drive towards monolingualism. A few world languages being really large and studied, and most of them getting smaller and being endangered. So when you mentioned Icelandic being endangered, I think that is maybe one language that might not be okay. But there are a lot of other pretty big languages out there that have more than a couple of more than tens of millions of speakers. But if people don't study that language, and everybody who speaks that language, say, learns English perfectly and goes out into the global world and global economy, I think that in a couple of generations, languages like that would be in danger too. So it's a fascinating topic. I'm not sure I have any concrete answers, but those are some of my thoughts.
What languages would you say? Because then, don't worry, I'll relax a little bit about Icelandic. Don't worry, he's not president anymore, Mr. Johannesson. He's not incumbent anymore. But if he's watching, well, first of all, please come on, and I'll do my best to preserve the Icelandic language. That's fine. What languages would you say are the most at risk of being extinct in the future that a lot of people don't know about or don't talk about?
Well, gosh, I mean, if you go look on a site like Ethnologue and just look at they have ways of filtering languages by numbers of speakers and stuff. I mean, there's a zillion. There's not a zillion. That's an Americanism for a lot. There are there's now saying there's 7,000 or 8,000 languages that we can name, and here they are, and many of them are dialects of each other. But most people haven't heard of most of them. So go look at a list of these, and you'll see languages where they say, well, there's only 100 speakers left, or 1,000 speakers left. So that would be one way of going about it. Or are you referring to languages that we could name right now that are known languages out there that might like you said, you could name Icelandic, and I said, well, maybe that's not so concerned, but there is concern maybe for some others. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. So sort of like a language that we can list, but that people might be familiar with, not necessarily speaking, but they know that the language exists, but they don't realize that it is at risk.
Right. Well, like I say, I think any language that is, we were talking about Korean before. Korean is, I'm happy to say, is attracting more people to study it, and has a pretty robust population. If you include all the people in Korea, and more people are studying it, and it's interesting. But Korean is a very difficult language, very, very difficult, very time consuming, and if only Koreans were to speak Korean, which was the case until fairly long ago, and now all Koreans they've done something. They've talked about educational systems. They've put English emphasis in their educational system, so that now Koreans of the younger generation who are going through school now, when they come out of school, they're pretty good at English. Whereas my wife, when I met her, she could pass have passed any test that they gave and done very well on it, but couldn't say a single thing. And so it's a very different way of learning. So if all Koreans learn how to speak English perfectly and go out into the English-speaking global economy, and people don't study and learn Korean a lot like this, what's going to happen? Koreans will get used to speaking English all the time, maybe speak it among themselves, speak it with other people, they'll intermarry with other people, and it'll just sort of become less and less used. So even a language that has 80, 100 million speakers could be, if we're thinking a couple of hundred years down the line, not even that far, a couple of generations would do it.
Yeah, and actually, Korea is an interesting one because I personally don't know too much about it. It's not a language that I've ever even, opened a book on or anything. I'll be honest. A couple of my friends have. I've watched, some documentaries on Korean history. I recently just got finished watching. There's a great YouTube channel because I'm a big geography buff as well. So Geography Now, and I watched both Korea episodes now. In that video, the presenter said that there is a bit of a distinction between the modern political status of the Korean Peninsula, where he said that that North Korean is a lot more homogenous and a lot more, I guess, historically accurate, and whereas South Korean is a little bit more anglicized. And I don't remember what the Korean word is for ice cream, but he said along the lines that the South Koreans now say ice cream or something like that, whereas the North Koreans say something that is, I don't remember it, but it sounds very Korean. It has no ties to any English word. So as someone who obviously is married with someone who's Korean, who speaks Korean, who has knowledge of Korea, who has lived in Korea, would you say that that's a true statement, that that South Korea and the language in South Korea is a little bit more anglicized than in the North?
Absolutely. You just did a perfect, very, very good summary of it. And in addition to my other credentials there, I'll say, because I was asked to do it, I wrote a couple of books, or readers, the North Korean readers, and Korean books for studying Korean that took into account the difference between North and South Korean. And so it's something that I have some expertise in. And everything you just said is essentially true, to the degree that my South Korean linguist friends, professors at the university where I was, who were South Korean linguists, they would openly say that North Korean is better Korean, purer Korean. It's hasn't, as you just said, it hasn't taken in all these English learned words. It hasn't taken in Russian words. They sort of tried to get rid of the Chinese, which is impossible because that's where all the etymology comes from. But they got rid of the Chinese characters, and they just sort of favored sort of native Korean terms. Whereas, South Korean had all those much more influence from other languages. So. But that's a scholar's opinion. That's not what most people think. If people are defecting from north to south, and when they get there, they can communicate, but everybody can hear their accent, and they think that it's somehow funny or different. But you can communicate well in either version. They're not different languages by any means, but I would say that the way you summarized it is quite true.
Okay, awesome. Well, I can't take all the credit. That was taken directly from the Geography YouTube channel, Geography Now, so shout out to him. Unfortunately, I can't take credit for that as much as I would love to. But then, hearing that, I, again, just in my research, in my personal research, I also found a similar case with what you just said, Alexander, about the Hebrew language, because there's a Israeli guy that I used to follow on YouTube. He doesn't really post videos anymore, and he said that everyone who speaks Hebrew speaks incorrect Hebrew, and that if you speak proper old, well, not necessarily old Hebrew because it has changed, but if you speak absolutely 100% grammatically correct Hebrew, they look at you as if, okay, little bit strange, bit of an accent, what is this dialect from? Because there's no regional country in the world that speaks perfect Hebrew. So would that be a similar case then with Korean, where maybe someone who would defect from the north to the south, they would speak more proper Korean, but that would also be a little bit weird for the South Koreans who maybe have grown up with a bit more English and Russian, Japanese, and, well, American influence?
Yes, I think that's definitely the case. You can, Korean has a lot of verb endings. So the final thing that you hear at the end of any sentence is the ending of the verb, and it doesn't tell you the like first person, second person, or anything like that, who's speaking, I am or you am, but it tells you something about the respect level. It tells you something about the relationship between the speakers. And so there's a number of different verb endings that you can use. And the verb endings that are used in North Korea are sort of, they're kind of old fashioned. In South Korea, they're literary. People might not necessarily end with this. They would write it, they would recognize it, but it's just not something that they would speak. Whereas conversely, this is what I was told by these South Korean linguists of colleagues of mine, is that the most common verb ending that you hear in South Korean is originally was just a feminine verb end, a feminine sound. But it was like Japanese still has male and female speech differentiated. Korean used to be like that. So it was just a female verb ending only from Seoul, the capital region. But when in modern times, this formerly female Seoul dialect verb ending has become sort of the most common verb ending in South Korea. So a North Korean coming to South Korea would think everybody sounds like a woman from Seoul, and he doesn't speak that way, he doesn't know how to make that sound. He wouldn't feel comfortable ending with that kind of thing once he got used to it, and everybody would think that he sounds old-fashioned or like a hick or something like that. But they would communicate just fine.
Well, I suppose you also have that with English too, but not necessarily in the, someone defects from an English-speaking country, because I don't actually think that's a thing currently. Hopefully it never will be. But, there are some people where they speak a certain type of English where maybe they use slang, something, just off the top of my head. I read in an article recently about early interwar period 20th century slang, like gobbledygook was one of them. I'm not too sure what that means. I think it was from the 30s or 40s. But, if someone were to speak like that completely, you'd go, all right, where's this person from? Because that's not really spoken anymore. If someone spoke, I guess, like Shakespearean English, you'd also have a similar reaction. So I guess that's sort of the thing everywhere. Now, with my conversation with Alex Rawlings, he brought up an interesting point about how languages evolve over time and, regional accents, because this is something that you have in England and the US as well, and Australia. I'm not too sure if New Zealand has this, but England and the US definitely, where depending on what region someone's from, they have a different accent. So someone from Manchester is going to sound different than someone from Liverpool. Someone from California is going to sound different to someone from Georgia. Alex said that he saw that three languages, particularly Hebrew, Russian, and Hungarian, don't have this issue. In your experience, is there any other language in the world that in the country itself, there isn't much of an accent divide, and everyone kind of sounds the same?
Well, I don't know that I know as much as Alex knows on that, because I couldn't say that for Hungarian. Hebrew, that might, now that he says that sounds quite right. That, because what you were talking about before, I mean, Hebrew. The amazing thing about Hebrew is that it was a dead language. It was a scholarly language. It was a rabbinical language until just a couple of generations ago, and then a government made a decision. Oh, this is going to be our national language, and everybody's going to use it and learn it. So I think everybody who speaks Hebrew today, whether they speak it rightly or wrongly by the standards of proper, official, old-fashioned rabbinical Hebrew, I think everybody who speaks Hebrew today has learned it in a concentrated time, in a concentrated way, and the same way everybody else is. So I wouldn't imagine that there would be much room for differentiation within, modern spoken Israeli Hebrew. So that makes perfect sense. Russian, I think he's perfectly right there too. Russian is a fascinating account. There are definitely some, regional dialectical, forms of Russian that you can hear. But given the size of Russia, the largest, it's Russian. Russian is talk about languages having a spirit. The Russian spirit is the most expansive. There's no geographical language that covers more distance, than Russian. Contiguous distance. So you could walk from, if you could walk from St. Petersburg to Vladivostok, you wouldn't hear that much differentiation in the dialects as you would hear if you walked in a much, much shorter, briefer span of space and pretty much anywhere else in the world. So something is amazing about Russian in that sense, I think. So that's good. Maybe I would hazard, Icelandic. There might be some regional dialects there too, but I think that anywhere where you have a small population and good education and modern broadcasting, radio broadcasts for a couple of generations, I think that the dialects get obviated. I think here in the United States, you still find some people that have regional accents, but you also find more and more people who you can't really tell where they're from. They're from somewhere. They're from somewhere in the South, like you mentioned, Georgia, and they don't sound like it at all. So that, I think, is the factor of sort of a common education, common broadcasting, common things like that. So there are languages where I think the dialects are being leveled, or countries where the dialects are being leveled. I think maybe in Britain you still have more regional pronunciation than here, or I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong about that. So interesting question.
No, you're definitely right, because someone from Cornwall is going to sound a lot different than someone from Fraserburgh up in Scotland. Or someone from Londonderry or Derry, they're going to sound a lot more, or Belfast, they're going to sound different to someone from Norwich. So that is definitely true, and with that there comes the preferences of which accent is better. I'm curious, with South Korea only, is that also a thing? So or do people from Seoul sound exactly the same than people from Busan?
No, I could hear the regional accents, and just yes, Seoul is the privilege, the standard speech, the one that's taught, the thing like this. And so people from Seoul would generally only speak Seoul. But if you meet somebody from Busan, they can speak Busan with people from Busan, and code switch to Seoul and use Seoul, sort of standard in sort of in the college classroom and around. But if they meet somebody else from Busan, it's that's the same thing here. I noticed. What you just mentioned, I had a colleague at the American University in the Emirates, and she was, I think, from Kentucky, and she sounded kind of like me. She didn't have any particular regional Southern accent that I could hear. And then one day we went on some sort of excursion where she met another professor who was also from the South, and the second they both knew that they were from this, they switched into Southern speech. I mean, they just had that. So there are people that know how to do that. That's an interesting thing to observe. Well.
Yeah, actually, to be honest, that is something that, now that you mentioned it, I am going to start looking out for in the future. So hopefully, because my friends are quite international anyway, so I think I'll start looking into that. Whereas, for me, I don't know, because I don't know if that would be a thing for me, because I'm speaking to you right now, and obviously you're American, I lived in America, so I didn't switch to an American accent when I was talking. When I'm talking to you, I don't necessarily switch with my friends. Or, when I was in America, I didn't switch to like a perfect, Queen's English accent with my English friends. Or, in Hungary, I don't. Everyone says in Hungary that I have like a international accent. They don't know where I'm from. All they know is that I didn't grow up there. They know that's what they always say. Okay, he's from somewhere else, but he speaks the language. So they always ask. I'm glad that you mentioned that about the American University in the Emirates, because that was actually something I wanted to ask. Because for me, language diversification, if you're doing it in one place your whole life, can be a little bit difficult. I'm someone who grew up abroad. I love to travel. I love to live abroad. I love being a foreigner in a country. I actually don't like being in a country where I'm from originally. It's kind of weird. I prefer to be the foreigner.
I was saying I understand that completely. Most of my life and career, I've felt that. I've only returned to live in the United States the past couple of years, and I guess I'm getting used to it a little bit where I am. But yeah, for most of my life, I felt exactly like you did. I enjoyed being in a foreign country. When I came back to visit at home, I felt it's kind of strange being here. I prefer being abroad. I'm sorry, I interrupted you, but I just wanted to say that.
No, it's fine. No, I completely agree with you, Alex. I like the idea of being a foreigner. I don't like getting the tourist foreigner pay charges. I don't like that. I don't appreciate that. But hopefully if I can speak the language, I can avoid it in most cases. But it says on here that, and you just mentioned that you taught in the Emirates, South Korea, Singapore, Lebanon, just to name a few. So would you say that it's important to live and travel abroad if you are trying to learn multiple languages?
I could have been an armchair scholar with older languages, maybe, but I don't feel I couldn't be the person I am now without the experience I had. To me, it was really integral to, particularly with languages like Korean and Arabic, which are the two really difficult languages that I've given about 10 years of my life, each of them, to trying to live them intensively. It's just without question, a language like that, you need to go and live it and be exposed to it and just get have years of work at it. So languages like that absolutely require it, and just in general. Yes, to hear languages in their own environment is very different from just hearing any kind of recording or watching TV, but actually going to a place where a language has lived and appreciating the fact that a language is not just the vocabulary and the grammar, but a language really is the culture that it's carried and the things that it expressed, the literature, the tradition that it has that is there. And so if you really want to know a language, you need to know that. You need to know what's been expressed in it. You need to know how people think in it, and their cultural background, the things that they read and the things that they think about. And that just takes, in my mind, you have to be plunged into that environment. I had to. I don't think I could. If I had never had the opportunity to go abroad, I'm sure I'd be some sort of language scholar still, but I wouldn't be the person I am now if I hadn't done what I was able to do.
Yeah, and I think there are so many learning curves when you live abroad as well. You kind of realize that the world is very big, but it's also very small at the same time. That's kind of what I found, and with that, just how you mentioned about the culture, that's something that I've actually never thought about. But now that you say it, it's like, So Finnish, there's a big thing in Finland where I'm not too clued up on it. I've never been to Finland, but I've read a lot about it and watched a lot about it and spoken to a lot of Finns about it. There's this whole idea about sisu, which is kind of like this stoic way of thinking, I guess, in Finland. But you can only really explain it or talk about it in Finnish. It's kind of difficult. Like if I was to speak Hungarian, talking about this sisu ideology, unless you're naming it like I am now, but if you were to say in Hungarian, like, oh, I have sisu, it probably wouldn't work because it isn't tied to that culture at all. Or, if a Korean were to talk about sisu, it would be a little bit weird because that's a Finnish thing that only in the Finnish language makes sense. Whereas that is true. I've actually never really thought about it that way. And just how you mentioned about Arabic being another one of the exotic languages that you learned, is spending time in Lebanon, the United Arab Emirates as well. I believe, because I was doing some reading on Arabic recently, I believe if most people who are looking to learn Arabic, they are taught Egyptian Arabic. Which country do you think had the more proper way of speaking Arabic? Was it the Emirates or was it Lebanon?
I don't know if it's proper to talk about proper in this sense. I think there are different, there are different dialects, and you could look at it from different perspectives. On the one hand, people talking about learning a colloquial version of spoken Arabic. Yes, I mean, Egyptian would be the largest and the place, therefore, if you're thinking about the most people you could speak with, and also have sort of the film industry. So a lot of things are produced in that, and so people can hear that abroad. So it's sort of spoken more broadly than where it is. I think the same is true of Lebanese or Levantine Arabic. That's sort of what's spoken in is Lebanon and Palestine and Syria. And that also has sort of more, I think, more stuff written in it, but it has more writers who've come from it and not written in it, but taken that dialect and made it be sort of educated. And there's been some good universities in Lebanon for a long time, so I think that dialect also has some degree of properness. But then you could look at sort of Gulf Arabic and you say, well, if my idea of proper is to be more like the Quranic Arabic, that's standard, old, that's the source here. So those languages could claim to be more to it. But the fact is, the matter is that Arabic is actually not as highly differentiated as people commonly believe. That these dialects are mutually incomprehensible. That's not what I observed. It really isn't. I'd read all the time too that if you took somebody from Baghdad and put him with somebody from Marrakesh, they would just have no ability to communicate. And maybe if they were, that's true, and then they wouldn't be meeting. But if they were two sort of uneducated people who only knew their own local dialect and had not heard any other, then that might be thing. But the same thing is true because of the tie of broadcasting and people hearing Arabic, standard spoken Arabic. I think Arabs from all over the place know that, well, I'm speaking to somebody from over there. And if I speak the way I speak at home and he speaks the way he speaks at home, we're not going to be able to communicate. So we both have to bend our speech a little bit, modify our speech a little bit. And this is something that I've got a lot of experience in doing. And so I witnessed at the university in Dubai that I had colleagues from Morocco, from Algeria, from Egypt, from Lebanon, from Syria, from Iraq, from all over the Arab world. And in a meeting where they'd speak Arabic, they wouldn't be speaking standard formal Arabic. They wouldn't be speaking any particular dialect. They would just be finding some common ground and speaking it. So I think that's an interesting phenomenon to be aware of. So if you were kind of fishing for my advice, I learned standard Arabic, and that's what you can buy books for. That's what you had the most material to learn. People who just want to learn a practical spoken language, yes, they might want to go for Cairo Arabic. But I think standard Arabic is to the Arabic dialects what Latin is. We were talking earlier what Latin is to the Romance languages. And so if you know standard Arabic, if you know modern standard Arabic, you can go and you can sort of make yourself understood, and you can understand most of the dialects, and you can pick up the dialect pretty easily. Whereas I think if you just learn a dialect and then you want to learn the standard form, I think you would have more work to do. So in terms of the principles of efficiency, I think a lot of people who are interested in learning Arabic might be put off by thinking, well, I, I can only learn the standard form, but the standard form isn't spoken, so what's the point? Maybe I have to track down a dialect and learn that. I don't think people necessarily need to go that route.
Okay, that's very interesting about Arabic. I'm curious. Well, obviously the Emirates was a European territory before 1971 as well, but just off the top of my head, this is not something that I've read. This is just something that I've just thought about as we're having this conversation. In the Lebanese dialect, is there any sign at all of any French influence? You know, like take the Korean example of ice cream, right? Is there anything similar with Lebanese Arabic where you can kind of tell that that was a French word that influenced it?
Absolutely, yes. There's a lot of French in Vietnamese Arabic, yeah, and French and English are starting to come in, which is different from, again, the formal Arabic is like we were talking about Korean, North Korean, which is trying to be a purist language, and Icelandic, which is a purist language. They don't adapt foreign loan words. Standard formal Arabic doesn't take loan words too, but various dialects do. And so yes, there being languages that are in the francophone sphere are influenced, have French dialects. Like so, Moroccan would also have a lot of French in it, or Algerian would have French in it, and maybe ones that were British colonies, like maybe Iraqi, would have more long-standing old English influence in it. And certainly, you don't hear young Emirati students being carefully purist in their use of language, and so they'll drop a lot of current terms, which are sort of in the English fashion, into the what would be called the Emirati dialect.
In the Semitic realm, as I like to call it, so Semitic languages always interest me, whether it's Arabic, Farsi, Amharic, Maltese, Aramaic, Hebrew, all of these languages. Which would you say, just as we talked about the Latin being the mother of the Romance languages, which would you say is the mother of the Semitic languages, if there even is one?
Wow, that's a great question too. Excuse me for being pedantic. Maybe you just slipped through the tongue, but you mentioned Farsi as being a Semitic language. Persian, Farsi, does use the Arabic script, and it's got tons of Arabic loanwords in it, but it's an Indo-European language. But yeah, all the other ones that you mentioned are
Okay.
Semitic languages, and the Semitic languages go way back. They go way back. Sumerian was not a Semitic language. Sumerian is the first written language that we have text and knowledge of. But pretty much all the other languages you can name from ancient Mesopotamia, Akkadian and Chaldean and Babylonian, all these languages are Semitic languages. And so also are it's a big family. It goes off Hebrew into Amharic and into Ethiopia and all around. Coptic I think, is a variation of maybe like Maltese, maybe mix some things mixed in, but that's there too. So Coptic goes back to ancient Egyptian. I think there's controversy whether ancient Egyptian itself is Semitic or not, and generally people think it isn't. But yeah, so you got a lot of ancient languages. You could say, in a sense, Hebrew's got a long continuity of being around, but it's not the sort of the mother of them all. I don't know if there is necessarily one that we could point to and say it's sort of the Latin of this family, or the Sanskrit would be another version in the Indian languages, where you could say yes, everything is derived from this. But if you just want to go by population again, I would say that today, again, Arabic is a giant language, but it's standard Arabic would be the equivalent of Latin. And then you could say yes, the spoken dialects, the Cairo dialect versus the Baghdad dialect would be the languages that would be influenced by that.
Okay. Okay, no, yeah, because I was wondering, because, thinking about it, I would have thought that, Hebrew and Arabic, especially, they have some similarities. I don't know much about them, but with the greetings, they sound quite similar. They're kind of very similar words. It's only, instead of a S, it's a sh, and the A and the O, that type of differences. But I actually didn't know. I knew that Farsi Persian was an Indo-European, but I also thought it was Semitic. So I'm glad that you pointed that out. Just a quick question then: would Tajik also be a Indo-European language then, not a Semitic one?
So Persian, we call it, West Persian is Farsi, okay, and East Persian is Dari, Tajiki, okay, is also like a form of East Persian. So that's written in the Cyrillic script, but those are all considered variations of Persian. So you have, yes.
No, it's just because I read that someone who had spoken Farsi, they were also learning Tajik, and they in one of their videos they said that they found a lot of similarities between it. And me reading up on Farsi, I found some things that were quite interesting that did sort of tie it to Indo-European languages, such as gender neutrality is apparently a thing in Farsi, which I didn't know. Actually, the only thing, like you said, that they do use the Arabic letters, although apparently, according to some sources, they don't use all of them, which is quite interesting. Alexander, I'm curious, is there any language out there that you haven't yet studied at all? You haven't even read a sentence about it, but maybe down the line you'd be really interested to learn about it and perhaps even speak it in the future.
Yes, I could name some, but I would try to restrain myself. I'm 60 years old now, and I have got a lot of languages started that I have a chance of, taking them to a really high level of reading and learning and use and understanding and knowledge across the board towards mastery, as it were, towards, in that direction. And I've already studied an enormous number of languages that I've had to say, okay, I can't take you all this way, so I've already put some of you back. So to start something else is very tempting, but it would be, maybe I wouldn't be able to resist. One thing that would do it, I finally got, we haven't talked about methods. I've always been terribly fond of this assimil method from France, and a number of years ago they published a Tamil book for learning a Dravidian language in their method and their methodology, and it's incredibly rare. You can never find it anywhere. If you can, it's some absorbed, literally thousands of dollars for one book. It's ridiculous. But I finally found some version of it where it's like, oh, if I could finally find that, if I could finally look at Assimil's Tamil, because I love their method and I know that they would be in a certain way. So if I got that might be irresistible to learn a Dravidian language.
Okay, well, just actually going on from that, this isn't in that family branch. It's just a close by territory to that of India, because one language that has always interested me ever since I heard about this place, and I have a lot of questions about this place, so I've a lot of things don't make sense about this place for me personally, and I feel like they're hiding something personally. But North Sentinel Island, if you're familiar with it, it's not a place where I would personally recommend going to try and learn the language, because of just how the tribes react to any outsiders. But the Sentinelese language is something that really interests me, because the story allegedly goes that they migrated from the east of Africa to the island that they live on now, but that was about 60,000 years ago, and they still live there. So that's an ultra isolated language where they've only had about five documented contacts with the outside world. So for me, I'm not going to put my life on the line to try and hear what Sentinelese is like. But for me, if I could even know what it sounds like, because I don't believe anyone has a recording of it. If I could just maybe find out what it sounds like, do they write at all? What if they do write on anything? What does their alphabet look like? Is there any influence from any ancient language? So for me, it would have to be the Sentinelese. I don't know if you're familiar with North Sentinel Island at all, but that has always interested me so much.
No, that's fascinating. I can totally understand that. I mean, now that you've got me going on that, there's places I would love to find some mysteries of. I mean, I'd love to truly hear. I think it's called Rapa Nui, the speech of Easter Island, and because that's a place. How did those giant heads get there? And they did have a writing system. Where did it come from? It's a Polynesian language that had some culture. It'd be fascinating to know what that is. I mean, there's a lot of linguistic mysteries out there that would be very, very, very tempting to solve. And yes, to hear a language and say, wow, maybe this is this an uncontaminated on languages that's literally that thousands of years old. Other mysteries like Basque, Euskara, where did that come from? Is that a Neanderthal influenced language? That'd be fascinating to hear what a Neanderthal spoke like, wouldn't it? To hear somehow a Neanderthal speech or other things like that. So yeah, there's just in terms of sort of satiating your thirst, and and listening to different languages. That's fascinating. I thought you were going to say you would like to learn that, and we were talking about learning. I think that learning in a language like that, where there's got no methods and it's a totally different culture, and all you could do is just sort of go there and live in a totally alien lifestyle. That's a lifetime task to just learn one language like that, really, to go and document that. And so when you think of how many I don't know what you want to call them, missionaries or explorers, or people in past times, had no methods, and were captured, taken slaves, just sort of found themselves living with other people and had to learn to communicate. So it's fascinating to think of learning any language under circumstances like that. I wouldn't want to uproot my life and have that happen, but if you try to think about what would be tempting to do to learn a language like that, how would that be?
Well, I'll tell you what, Alexander. If you're ever watching the TV and you see a white guy on North Central Island with a big beard, and it's been in the news that I've disappeared for a while, then just know that I pulled through with it. And as soon as I can get off the island, I'll be sending you any dictionary that I could, maybe do a translation on to get the Sentinelese language out there. I thought about, maybe sending, because they ban people from going there now, because they literally kill everyone that goes there. But I thought about, okay, what if you send a drone with a microphone? But the Indian Navy, I don't want to start getting in trouble with the Indian Navy, but if you ever see a white guy with a big beard on North Sentinel Island with a spear, just know that I made it. So that will be that would be a great mission, but it's going to take a lot of time. But for me, again, not necessarily with the North Sentinelese tribes, but also the tribes of the Amazon as well. You see all these photographs come out of like people in helicopters taking aerial shots of them, and the way that they live is unbelievable. It's so fascinating, whether they live in the Acre state of Brazil or maybe in the Amazon area of Ecuador, to be able to hear how these people talk and communicate. And I don't know if they do, but if they have any writing format at all, it would be so interesting. But for me, there also comes a thing where I like the mystery. I like the idea of not knowing what Sentinelese is like. And if I hear it and I go, oh, okay, then that mystery is ruined forever for me. So I kind of like the idea of not knowing everything about the world.
That's a good attitude to have. Keep curiosity alive, yes.
Yeah, definitely. Just before we start wrapping up, I also wanted to ask you about Greek, because Greek is another Indo-European language that it's completely fascinated me, because I don't believe there is any other language like that in the world. I believe the same principle could be said about Albanian in Europe, that you don't really have a language similar to Albanian. So in your studies of Greek, what would you say are the major things that you have seen that are different between Greek and any other Indo-European language that you'd be familiar with?
So, I guess, to me, the distinctive thing about Greek is it's what I call is diachronic, cross-time continuity. I think that Greek today and the oldest forms of Greek that we have, yes, there's a lot of change. They're different. You would need to learn, different things in order to be able to read them. But they're really close together compared to, we're using English right now. If we were to take the English that we're using right now, compare that to the English of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, just real, old English. There's a much greater difference between English today and English 1,500 years ago than there is between Greek today and Greek 3,000 years ago. So it's got a unity of something. That's an interesting thing. In terms of its grammatical features and functions, I don't know that it has really distinctive things that you don't find in other languages, but they're different roots. They're different. It's not a Romance language. It's not some other thing. So when you start grouping some of its words together, you have different vocabulary, you have different locutions, you have different things. So it's distinctive in that it's not, you wouldn't be able to identify any sisters that went with it. Same way with Albanian, I think. You wouldn't be able to identify sisters, but they don't necessarily have distinctive features like, they have the same cases and things, different combinations of cases in their grammatical system.
Yeah, because Greek for me is always interesting. So I've never been to Greece, but I've been to Cyprus before, and just seeing obviously the different alphabet and how getting used to what the S letter is and what the Th letter is and everything. Yeah.
You just said the obvious thing. Only Greek uses the Greek alphabet, right? Only Greek uses the Greek alphabet. So in its diachronic continuity, its written form, that was part of my answer in its written form. But yes, only Greek uses it.
Yeah, yeah, and just like having getting used to, because it's there's some Latin letters in there that are modern day Latin. There are some letters that are very similar, or if not the same, to Cyrillic. So you can kind of get an understanding. But the sir, the third, and many other languages, many other letters, I mean, are you kind of have to think. Okay, so that's the capital case, and that's the lowercase. Okay, of that same letter. So for me, that's what makes it very much so a unique language. Now, as a linguist yourself, Alexander, I'm curious about your thoughts on this. Obviously, you said it yourself. Alex said the same thing. I believe Hungarian with Sissy and I had a similar conversation about this. We touched upon briefly about how the world is quite monolinguistic. Right now, people speak a lot of languages around the world, but still, you're seeing fewer and fewer people speak multiple languages. So, as a linguist, Alexander, what do you think about these languages that have sort of been constructed so that everyone can speak one language? I'm talking about things like Esperanto, where they're trying to solve an issue of not being able to communicate with each other. But do you think it's better that everyone speak Esperanto, or do you think it's better that everyone speak multiple languages?
Definitely the latter. Definitely. I mean, I would, if I could wave a magic wand and make the world be like I wanted it to be, I would make everybody, love languages and speak and have a variety. I'm just this, richness and variety. I think that does languages give perspective into other cultures. And I think if I could make a magical world where everybody knew a handful of languages and they knew languages from different cultures, there would be a lot more creativity, a lot more understanding. So I'd be idealistic and think about that. That would be nice. The impulse behind Esperanto to say, well, let's get a language that everybody can use is coupled with another argument that I think Esperantists would want to use to make their argument stronger, is that Esperanto is not just a sort of a new language, a neutral language that takes from a lot of different things, but it's supposed to be easy to learn. It's supposed to be easier to pick up Esperanto than to do anything. It's supposed to be sort of culturally neutral. So it's not just, one language. So there's some sort of idealistic arguments that can be put forward by Esperantists. Unfortunately, I think most of the people in the world don't really care. I think most of the people in the world, they might on some level resent having been forced to learn English, but now they've learned English, they've learned it well, and they wouldn't want to learn another language, even if it's an easy language. And the Esperanto, like I was mentioning, I think there's a group of people who speak Latin. There's certainly groups of people who speak Esperanto. One good thing about Esperanto, and I know some people who are Esperantistas, people who are big into it, is that they have like this network of people. So you could travel, you could learn Esperanto, and you could go and you could stay with Esperanto groups in various places. So there's some interest to that. But yeah, I don't think that people are going to catch on to that. And then it's just there. I mean, and so I would just say if we're all going to learn an international language that right now is neutral, let's go back to Latin. Then we'll get all the advantages out of that, and we'll make Latin a spoken language again.
No, I agree completely. I'd love to start hearing people talking about, saying words like triginta, habeus, just words that spring got out of the top of my mind from the course that I haven't touched in 2 years. But if everyone went Salve, como te habes, how are you, what is your name, everything like that. And Latin just sounds cool. Like there are some languages that you hear and go, yeah, I'm not too fond of how it sounds. But Latin, I think the us and the is and the e sounds that you have in many words, you mainly hear them in chanting music now, frankly. But I do think it sounds very cool. Have you ever thought about writing your own language? I'm curious.
I experimented with my own scripts. I had a long time when I was really studying scripts and script systems, and I definitely experimented with my own scripts, and I tried to think, what would be a really interesting script system that may be adaptable to lots of things, and we're working with that. In terms of actually constructing a language or writing my own, no, I've never seriously thought about that. But and if I were to, I think it would be maybe something. I understand that now that the languages that Tolkien created have somehow been brought to life, or people use them, or languages that were written sort of as a sketch or sort of an idea. Some of the languages from Star Trek, say like Klingon, have actually been developed into languages. There are small groups of people who speak these as well. So yeah, I don't know, to sort of, if I were ever to write my own sort of Tolkien-esque type epic, then to invent a language to put it in there to make it be convincing. I can see I'm doing that, sort of as a sort of a literary puzzle for myself. And then if it actually came to life, wow, that'd be neat.
All right, well, don't worry. I'll try my very best to be able to learn Arguellian as soon as it comes out. So, I'll do my very best. So, actually, about the scripts, that's really fascinating because I'll be honest, in my spare time, sometimes I like to do that too. And I was reading up, and I was looking at the Aramaic, the old Aramaic script, and the modern Armenian script. So, I'm curious, your script that you've sort of dabbled in, is that something that's completely customized, or is it something where you've taken some Latin letters, you've taken some Cyrillic letters, or is it something that you've completely 100% made up in your mind?
Let's see. Well, with runic characters, runes. I mean, you have the Futhark, the elder Futhark, the younger Futhark, but you have a few basic characters. So there are a lot of characters that you could think of if you made a runic alphabet. You know that runic used to be written Anglo-Saxon, so you can sort of invent new runes to make other letters in other languages that are not there. So I know that I played around with the runes for a while and tried to make new runic characters, so deriving from that. And then, I think I did sort of try to, because I'd studied, well, Korean definitely has a totally different alphabet and others. So I'd seen these, and I guess I was at a certain point thinking, well, what do we have? How would you characterize both Latin and Greek and Cyrillic letters? They're sort of independent boxes with shapes. What is like the Arabic Persian script? It's these sort of squiggly lines. What's the Korean script? It's these circles and half shapes. So you think of all the different shapes that have been used, and I tried to think of some other system of shapes, of ways of connecting them. I don't know that I got very far, but it was interesting to try to think of how would people sort of devise letters for the first time? How would people write down symbols and get some sort of sound attached to it and read it? And it's really interesting when you first learn Arabic or Hebrew or some Semitic language, and you read from right to left instead of left to right. That's an interesting experience in itself. And when you learn to read Korean it was traditionally written top to bottom and right to left. So you would read Korean going this way traditionally, and now it's written left to right and top to bottom. But the interesting thing about Korean is that your eyes have to take in to kind of make a lot of little movements at the same time, because the Korean letters are not written straight this way or straight this way. They're sort of bunched together and to fit into the same sort of size square that people wrote Chinese characters in for the longest time. So they're made to fit in there. So in order for you to untangle the sound, if you want to say the sound is gup, G-U-P equivalent, you wouldn't just go this way. You would go this way and then down again. And then you would go over here. So your eyes are kind of moving in various shapes at the same time. And that took a long time to get used to.
Yeah, totally. Because when I think about Asian languages especially, because that's where I've seen a lot of the, you take Mongolian before they adopted the Cyrillic alphabet. I believe Mongolian was also written like this, not like this. Or, I'm glad that you brought up the runes, because Hungarian also has runes. When I was in Hungary and I saw a bunch of city signs in runes, and eventually I had to kind of grasp, okay, this is the M and that's the sh letter, and this is the O, and then how do I write my name? How do I write sentences in Hungarian using runes? Thankfully there is a website that does it, but I'd love to be able to write it by hand one day, or maybe get a keyboard. Sadly, a lot of social media platforms don't recognize it as an alphabet. So one time I wanted to post something in runes, and I copied it, pasted it, and it was just a bunch of little squares saying that it didn't recognize the image. So that was a bit of a shame. But yeah, like with Mongolian Korean, I actually didn't know that it used to be written like that. So that's very interesting. But Mongolian used to be as well before they obviously adopted the Cyrillic alphabet. I believe some Sino-Tibetans might have been as well, although I don't know if Jonga is written like that or like this. But Jonga's one that it's not one that I'd love to put effort into learning. But if I could like just magically like go to Bhutan for a couple years and just come out of it speaking Jonga and tell everyone that I speak Jonga, then that would be quite cool. Because I saw some Bhutanese monks at an airport once, and I would have loved to have a conversation with them. So that would have been quite cool. But yeah, languages are strange. So, if you got that far into thinking about it for your scripture, how would you have written your scripture? Would it have been like this? Left to right, right to left. How would it have been?
I don't recall what I was doing, but I think just to be perverse, maybe I would go from bottom to top. I don't think there's any script that goes from bottom to top that I can think of, and it might be fun to to try to do that. I'm not aware of any script that goes bottom to top. Are you? You ever heard of it?
No, well, apart from the future Arguellian language that everyone will be speaking in a couple of decades, but no, I haven't actually. No, none at all. So yeah, that would be class. If you ever get to that point, please like give me a dictionary or something, because we need to do another interview where we only speak Arguellian when the time comes. So if you ever do that, like we have to do that, and we'll do subtitles and everything. It'll be top quality. Alexander, just as we wrap up here, I like to go a little bit more philosophical with my questions. So the first one, there are three now, because I just thought of one a couple of days ago. So the first one would be, what would you say is the biggest, if like, let's say your life was a movie, what would be the turning point?
The turning point, language-wise, would be probably my whole experience in Germany. Yeah, my experience in Germany, my postdoctoral research time in Germany, my ability to go there and just spend 2 years studying pretty much on my own whatever I wanted to study, and being able to go to all sorts of archives and look at all sorts of materials. And I went with a specific research project, which was kind of along the lines we're talking about. It was looking into older scripts and looking and writing things and looking sort of some older connections. So I had a research project, and then I didn't have anybody to be accountable. So when I wanted to change it and do other things, I was free to explore other aspects of it as I wanted. So it was true academic freedom to just sort of explore archives and go to different countries to do it, go to Sweden, go to Austria, go all around and do that. And so, yeah, just to study a lot of things. And also, that was the point where I came to, by being in Europe, that's where I came to realize the real value of the historical, linguistic, philological background that I had, because I just had this experience time and again that I hadn't studied Swedish or Dutch or Italian, but when I went to these countries, I could really understand pretty much what people were saying. And if I studied them intensively there while I was, it was like waking them up. It wasn't like they were based on my background, my other languages. These were languages that were sort of getting in the bargain. There were branches, there were variations on themes, and I knew the themes. I knew if you know how to play Bach's Goldberg variations, with a couple of themes, you can recognize the other themes and you can work them out. And so the experience that I had of realizing that, wow, languages really are in families, they're branches, and I've got these branches and these themes, just having that experience of waking up languages and just being able to immerse myself in languages and develop so rapidly in them, compared to, again, that school experience of taking 7 years to get anywhere with French. So that whole experience was truly formative for me, sort of life-changing turning point. And then sort of bringing that to an end, that's when sort of like, that was also the point when it's like, hey, wow, I am capable of studying lots of different languages at the same time, and that's what I like doing, and that's what's interesting. And can I make opportunities to do that? Can I find opportunities to make that be my full sort of vocation? And looking around for that and sort of finding that, not in Germany, but in Korea, and then making the decision to say, well, I could stay here and do this kind of language, and this is wonderful, and this is fascinating, and now I'm waking things up, and I've done this. Or I could go and do something totally new, something totally different. And I just thought, I need to do that. While we were talking about ages yet, I was still relatively young. I think I was 32 years old then. I just thought, not so much, I'm getting too old to learn a language, but I know that learning a language like Korean is going to take like a decade. So if I want to get anywhere, if I want to learn an exotic language well, I need to get started now. So that experience in Germany of, again, just being able to study freely, realize languages, get this, and then think, do I want to just keep doing this, the familiar, or do I want to add something exotic to it? And so I would say that period of my life in Germany when I was 30, 31, 32 years old, that would be the sort of the turning point of my life as a scholar, because I did that and I looked and I said, well, I had the opportunity now. I've done my postdoc thing. I've got some leads and offers to go back to America and sort of start a normal, typical academic career at an established university where I could, be professor emeritus now, maybe at some major American university. If I wanted to follow a normal, typical career, I could have possibly have come back and done that at that point, or had the opportunity to stay in Germany and do some things there. And decided, no, I want to go live in a really exotic country. I mean, it's not what I'm sorry, I didn't forget the name. What you said, the North the Sindanese, you said North Sindanese, that
Sentinelese, the North
Korea,
Sentinelese, yeah.
North Sentinelese. So Korean wasn't North Sentinelese back then, but I looked at Korean and I thought, Korean is, compared to Japanese and Chinese, is very little studied. There's very little material for it, and it was just I just felt that this was an opportunity where I had to go and I could learn a language that was really, really different, really, really difficult. I could learn it by myself in the country, and I could learn not just the language, but I could learn the literature and the culture and the history through it. And so I wanted to really immerse myself in that, sort of making that decision at that time to say that's more important to me than to go home and to stay with the familiar in terms of languages, or to like go home and sort of have a typical standard academic career, or to sort of go abroad and really live and chase these languages down. I decided that I wanted to do that.
Okay. And just how you mentioned Germany, I have to ask, did you ever, so every time I go to Germany, I must admit I prefer Austria as a country in most cases, not their citizenship, but everything else I prefer Austria. But this applies to Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Liechtenstein. Did you ever get to visit the very large city of Ausfahrt? Because every time I'm driving in Germany, I always see a sign that says Ausfahrt here. So did you ever manage to visit?
No, that means exit. You're getting off the highway. That's what it means. Get off the highway. Ausfahrt.
Yeah, but that's like a running joke. Anytime anyone goes like, "Oh, Ausfart's that way," I wonder what that city is like. Oh, it's a transnational city. Wow, so it's in Austria too. Damn, like they must be a huge city. So sadly, no one has gone to Ausfahrt yet, but one day I'll be able to make it. I just need to, and I reject the idea that it means exit. I don't believe that for a second. It's a city that they're hiding from, as Alexander. I promise you, it is. There's no way it's labelled in Austria, Switzerland, Liechtenstein. They probably even have it in Namibia. So there's definitely something going on there.
You may have a point.
Yeah. Final question, Alexander. This is very deep, very Marcus Aurelius of me, but I like to do it. What is the meaning of life?
What is the meaning of life? Well, I'm not sure that this is the absolute ultimate meaning of life, but in order to think about the meaning of life at all, we need to use languages, right? We can't think about life without languages, without thinking in a language. We can't articulate our thoughts. We need a language to think about life. And we need to learn multiple languages in order to learn how languages work and how our brain works using languages. And so just for the purpose of reflecting and thinking and doing anything, maybe the meaning of life is learning languages. I can't think of something else that would carry over more. I mean, I think that, yes, you could probably study and explain the universe mathematically. I'm sure you can. But can you think in numbers? Maybe some people can. I can't. Maybe that'd be an interesting language to learn if you learn how to think in numbers. But Yeah, if you wanted to say, well, the meaning of life is to do something meaningful, something that's valuable, something that will bring me, bring me good, satisfaction, and return on my investment of time and energy and passion. And in terms of that, I wouldn't say it's the be all and end all, but in a certain sense, learning language is very, very important. So that could be a clue, a key to being able to do pretty much anything else. If you're interested in, in other, whatever else you might be interested in other, things. When we think of the meaning of life, you're thinking more religious terms, right? Well, if you're interested in Buddhism, you've got to learn Sanskrit or Tibetan to learn to read those texts in the original and see what they're saying. So if you want to go for something deep and philosophical, language. If you want philosophy and deep answer, you need to learn Latin and Greek in order to read it. So I think that's if it's not the meaning of life is learning language, I think learning languages opens the door to having a more meaningful life, a more meaningful way of approaching life.
Well, I totally agree, and I agree that learning languages is a huge part of the meaning of life. I also have another one that would be for you watching this to subscribe to this channel. That is the meaning of life. I am confirming it, so that is another big thing. You have to subscribe to this channel. That's the meaning of life. I'm sorry, but it just is. So, and another meaning of life, once you have subscribed, because do that first, don't click off, is for you to check out Alexander's website, which will be linked down below in the description. If you're interested in learning about languages, maybe doing some courses with him, I would certainly definitely recommend it. And I'm sure you don't even need my recommendation, because if you've listened this far, he's probably convinced you himself. Alexander, I had an absolute blast talking with you today. I really appreciate your time. I can't thank you enough, and hopefully you enjoyed it. And just thank you for your time today.
I did enjoy it too. Thank you very much for inviting me. It was a pleasure talking with you.